Act 1. She clutched her coat tightly, her fingers trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of his words still echoing in her mind. You're just not enough for me. She had stared at him, waiting for a laugh, for a hint that this was some cruel joke, but his face was impassive, his posture indifferent, as if he hadn't just shattered the years they had spent together with a single sentence. Not enough? She had whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heart breaking. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, eyes shifting away from her. I need someone who matches my ambition. You're comfortable with small things. I want more. I loved you, she had said, her voice raw, and I appreciate that, he replied, as if he were politely rejecting an unneeded gift. Her stomach twisted. Appreciate? The conversation replayed in her mind as she walked aimlessly through the drenched streets. She had given him everything, her love, her loyalty, her unwavering support. And yet, he had tossed her aside like she was an outdated dream, a stepping stone on his path to something greater. But what cut the deepest was the realization that he had never truly seen her. She wasn't unambitious. She wasn't small. She had simply loved him enough to prioritize them, and for that, he had called her not enough. Tears mixed with raindrops as she made a silent vow this was the last time she would cry over him. Tomorrow, she would start over. Tomorrow, she would become someone impossible to overlook. Tomorrow, she would make sure that when he finally realized what he had lost, it would be too late. The sun rose on a new day, casting golden light across the city skyline. For the first time in a long while, Elena didn't wake up feeling hollow. It had been nearly 2 years since Aaron had walked out of her life, and every step since then had been a battle. A battle to prove to herself that she was more than what he had reduced her to. She had left behind the version of herself who lived in his shadow, who waited for his approval, who loved so deeply that she forgot to love herself. Now, Elena Turner was a woman reborn. She straightened her blazer and checked her reflection in the tall glass doors of Lancaster Enterprises, the empire built by the ruthless and enigmatic Nicholas Lancaster. The CEO was known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue, a man who rarely tolerated incompetence. He was a storm wrapped in a tailored suit, a king who built his kingdom on power and precision, and today she was about to step into his world. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the doors. The office buzzed with quiet efficiency as Elena navigated her way through the corridors. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, her confidence steady despite the hushed murmurs of employees who whispered about the new hire who had landed a coveted position under the CEO's direct supervision. It hadn't been easy getting here. After Aaron left her, she had thrown herself into work, taking night courses, refining her skills, and pushing herself harder than ever before. When the opportunity at Lancaster Enterprises arose, she had fought for it, determined to prove she belonged among the best. And now she was standing in front of his office. The doors swung open before she could knock. Nicholas Lancaster sat behind a massive desk, dark eyes scanning a document. He didn't look up when he spoke. You're late. Elena's brow arched. She was exactly 2 minutes early. I'm not, she replied smoothly. That made him glance up. Their eyes met, hers steady, his unreadable. He was undeniably striking, but it wasn't just his looks that made him intimidating. There was an aura of command about him, a presence that demanded respect. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, studying her as if she were a puzzle. You were the most impressive candidate. Let's see if you live up to it. For the rest of the day, he pushed her. Tests disguised as tasks, challenges hidden in every assignment. But Elena had spent too long proving herself to men who underestimated her. She wouldn't falter now. By the end of the week, she had done more than impress him. She had caught his attention. Meanwhile, across the city, Aaron sat in a cramped office, frustration simmering in his chest. His career hadn't taken off the way he expected. He had wanted more. Bigger, better, grander. But life had a way of humbling a man. And then, fate delivered a cruel twist. His new boss? Nicholas Lancaster. And the woman he had once discarded, the woman he had left behind thinking she'd never amount to anything, she was now standing beside the most powerful man in the industry. For the first time, an unsettling realization gripped him. Had he made a mistake? Chapter 3. Elena had faced challenges before. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up, proving her worth in a world that once told her she wasn't enough. But nothing had prepared her for Nicholas Lancaster's unwavering attention. It started subtly, a lingering glance when he reviewed her reports, a barely there smirk when she outwitted a competitor in a negotiation, the way his voice softened, just slightly, when he called her name. Nicholas Lancaster was not a man known for warmth. He was ruthless, efficient, and impossible to read. Yet, with her, there were moments, cracks in his carefully constructed armor, moments that made her wonder if she was imagining things. One evening, after a grueling day of back-to-back meetings, Elena stayed behind to finalize a report. The office had emptied out, like leaving only the quiet hum of city lights and the soft scratch of her pen against paper. A deep voice broke the silence. "You work too much." She looked up, startled to find Nicholas standing in the doorway. Gone was the suit jacket, the crisp white sleeves of his shirt rolled up, the top button undone. It was the most unguarded she had ever seen him. "I could say the same to you," she countered. A corner of his lips twitched. "Fair enough." To her surprise, instead of leaving, he walked over to the window and gazed out at the city. The tension that always clung to him seemed lighter in this moment, as if the weight of his empire wasn't crushing him for once. After a beat of silence, he spoke again. "Why did you come here, Elena?" The question caught her off guard. "Because I wanted more for myself." Nicholas turned to her then, his dark eyes unreadable. "And have you found it?" She exhaled, unsure how to answer. She had found success, respect, independence. But something was still missing, a quiet ache she refused to acknowledge. "I don't know," she admitted. Nicholas studied her for a long moment before speaking again. His voice was quieter this time, laced with something she couldn't quite place. "You will." And then he walked away, leaving her pulse unsteady and her mind racing. The shift between them became undeniable after that night. At meetings, Nicholas always directed his sharpest questions at her, not out of cruelty, but because he expected her to rise to the challenge. At charity galas, he made a point to escort her personally, brushing aside those who underestimated her. And when a rival company attempted to discredit her in negotiations, Nicholas cut them down with a single cold sentence: "If you can't recognize her value, you don't deserve to do business with us." She should have been wary. She should have kept her distance. But there was something intoxicating about being seen by a man like Nicholas Lancaster, a man who didn't just notice her, but chose her. Meanwhile, Aaron watched from the sidelines, his regret growing by the day. He saw the way Nicholas looked at Elena, the way she seemed to thrive in his presence. The woman he had once discarded as not enough was now standing beside the most powerful man in the city, and worse, she was happy. Aaron clenched his fists, resentment clawing at his chest. He had made a mistake, and he wasn't sure if he could live with it. Chapter 4. Elena had thought she had moved on. She had buried the past, carved out a new life, and found herself standing beside a man who saw her worth in a way Aaron never had. But the past had a cruel way of resurfacing when you least expected it. It started with a message. At first, she didn't recognize the number flashing on her phone. But when she opened the text, her breath caught in her throat. "Elena, we need to talk." She stared at the screen, fingers tightening around the device. After 2 years of silence, after throwing her away like she was nothing, he had the audacity to reach out now. She deleted the message without replying. But Aaron wasn't done. A week later, she ran into him in the worst possible place, the Lancaster Enterprises headquarters. She had been walking out of Nicholas's office when she saw him standing near the elevator, flipping through a folder. At first, she thought she was imagining it, but then he looked up and their eyes locked. Elena froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. The last time she had seen Aaron, she had been broken, small. Now she stood before him as a woman who had built herself from the ground up, and judging by the way his gaze traveled over her, the realization hit him too. "Elena," he breathed, stepping forward. She squared her shoulders. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated, then glanced down at the folder in his hands. "I work here." Her stomach twisted. No, fate wouldn't be that cruel. She swallowed hard. "Since when?" 2 months ago, Aaron admitted, his gaze flickering with something unreadable. "I didn't know you were." "With Nicholas?" She finished coldly, tilting her chin up. "Well, now you do." His jaw tightened. "So it's true? You and him?" The way he said it, like it was impossible, made something inside her snap. She took a step forward, back lowering her voice. You don't get to act surprised, Aaron. You lost the right to care when you left me for someone more ambitious. Regret flickered in his eyes, but she refused to let it shake her. Elena, please, he started, voice softer now. I made a mistake. A bitter laugh escaped her. And now you expect me to what? Forget everything? Fall back into your arms? Aaron swallowed. No, but I need you to know that Is there a problem here? The deep, commanding voice sent a shiver down her spine. Nicholas. He stood a few feet away, his dark gaze unreadable but sharp. He had heard enough. Aaron turned, stiffening under Nicholas's scrutiny. It was one thing to know the man who had replaced you. It was another to stand in his presence and feel utterly insignificant. Elena exhaled and stepped toward Nicholas. No problem at all, she said smoothly, sliding her hand into the crook of his arm. Nicholas glanced at Aaron, then back at her. His body remained relaxed, but there was something dangerously sharp in his expression. Good, he said simply. Aaron's face darkened as he watched Elena walk away with the man who now held everything he had taken for granted. And for the first time, he realized, he might have lost her forever. Chapter 5. Elena had always believed that the past was something you could leave behind if you worked hard enough to build a new future. But now, standing beside Nicholas Lancaster, the man she never expected to care for, while her ex, Aaron, lurked in the same building, she realized how naive that belief had been. The past wasn't content to be buried. It clawed its way back, refusing to be forgotten, and soon it would threaten everything she had built. After the uncomfortable run-in with Aaron, Elena expected Nicholas to say something, but he didn't. For the rest of the day, he remained his usual composed self, calm, calculating, unreadable. Yet she felt the shift, the way his glances lingered longer than before, the way his hand rested on the small of her back at meetings as if silently marking his claim, the way his voice turned colder when he addressed Aaron in passing. Nicholas Lancaster was not a man who reacted emotionally, but he was a man who played chess while others played checkers, and that terrified her more than she cared to admit. Aaron, on the other hand, did react emotionally. He had thought seeing Elena again would ease his regrets, that maybe he had exaggerated what he had lost. Instead, it had confirmed his worst fear. She had moved on, not just moved on, she had thrived. And she was with Nicholas Lancaster, a man who didn't just own an empire, but owned the respect and fear of everyone around him. A man Aaron now answered to, a man he couldn't compete with, unless he found a way to bring Nicholas down. A week later, Elena sat at her desk reviewing contracts when a message popped up on her screen. Anonymous, you should be careful who you trust. Nicholas Lancaster isn't who he pretends to be. Her fingers hesitated on the keyboard. She frowned, glancing around the office, but everyone seemed preoccupied with their work. Before she could react, another message appeared. Anonymous. Ask him about what happened to the last woman he was with. A chill ran down her spine. Her first instinct was to dismiss it. Whoever sent this was clearly trying to manipulate her. But then she remembered something. Nicholas had never once mentioned a past relationship. He was a man of few words when it came to his personal life, and she had never questioned it before. But now, doubt crept in like a shadow she couldn't shake. What had happened to the last woman in his life? That evening, Elena found herself in Nicholas's office, watching him from across the room as he poured himself a drink. Who was she? She asked abruptly. Nicholas paused, his hand tightening around the glass before he slowly turned to face her. Who? The last woman in your life, she said, meeting his gaze. And don't tell me it doesn't matter, because someone thinks I should be worried. His expression remained unreadable, but she saw the flicker of something dark pass through his eyes. After a long silence, he finally spoke. She was someone I trusted, he said, voice measured, and she betrayed me. Elena's breath hitched. She disappeared, he continued, setting his drink down. No one has seen or heard from her since. A sharp chill ran down her spine. Did you? She hesitated, not sure how to finish the question. Nicholas's gaze hardened. Do you think I killed her? The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. Elena swallowed. I don't know what to think. His expression didn't change, but the air in the room shifted. You're free to leave if you don't trust me, he said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. But if you stay, understand this. My past isn't clean. Neither is my world. But I've never given you a reason to fear me. She held his gaze, her heart hammering. She wanted to believe him, But in the shadows of her mind, doubt whispered. Was Nicholas Lancaster truly the man she thought he was? And if not, what had she just walked into?